Tonight, I figured we could do something a little different. I'm going to tell some scary stories. Now, I know we've never done anything like that before, but... oh, forgive me. But seriously, tonight we have 6 stories, which seems to be a bit of a trend lately. We'll be starting things off with a story of an escape room, which is a huge coincidence, because I'm going to be going to one pretty soon, and I'm pretty excited for it. We also have stories involving fairs, Halloween, and, as per usual, a lot more. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to share their stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Oh, and real quick, the author of the first story has recently released a new book. It is a collection of short stories and is available on Amazon. Of course, there will be a link to that in the description, so if you'd like to support the writer by checking it out, leaving a good review, etc., I bet they'd appreciate it. Please remember to drop a like if you enjoy, as it helps out the channel in a real way. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. It was my first time in an escape room. My friend Daryl wanted our whole group to go, since apparently it was free due to it still being in the testing phase. The place was called Detective Friends, and it required at least 4 people to play. Please leave your cell phones and other electronic devices here, the game master said. He asked nicely, but through his tone, I could tell it was more of an order. Why? Veronica asked. This is an immersive experience, and having cell phones ruins it. Even if you don't use them, we want the participants to feel like they are really trapped inside. He smiled widely. Come on, V, just hand over the phone so we can start. Veronica's boyfriend Mike said impatiently. The game master explained the rules briefly to us, after which he led us to a room and locked us inside. We observed our surroundings. The room itself looked like an ostentatious office, with bookshelves filled with books, various statues, and expensive-looking figurines. There were obvious objects we need to unlock, like safes and drawers, but other than that, it looked like an eccentric's office. There was a big monitor above the door which displayed the time we had remaining. Alright guys, split up and look for anything that could be a clue. Adam, check over there, Daryl said, pointing me to a bookshelf. Michelle seemed skeptical about the whole experience, given the fact that she glanced at the door every few minutes, but later joined in with the group. Hey, is this a clue? Mike said, holding up a small key. Let's try it here. Daryl snatched it from him and put it inside the drawer. The lock clicked, and he pulled out an envelope. Inside the envelope was a letter. What does it say? Veronica asked. Birth year of the youngest group member will open the safe, Daryl recited. We all wondered what that meant. We approached the safe on the other side of the room and inspected the lock. It had a 4-digit code, but we had no idea where to look for the code. We looked for codes around the room, but found no numbers written anywhere. Did they mean the youngest member of our own group? Michelle was the youngest member among us, so we entered the year of her birth. Sure enough, the safe unlocked. What the hell? How do they know when I was born? Michelle asked. Daryl shrugged and reached into the safe. He glanced at the contents for a moment in silence. Well, what is it? Veronica impatiently asked again. It's you. Daryl presented to Michelle what looked like a picture. On it was Michelle taking a shower. The picture was snapped unbeknownst to her. We all gasped, and Michelle herself turned completely red in the face. She yanked the photo away from Daryl and turned away from us to inspect it. What the hell is this? Some kind of sick joke? Veronica interjected. Alright, it's time we have a word with these sickos. Mike agreed. Veronica tried to open the door, and after confirming it was locked, she started pounding on it and screaming to be let out. She slammed the panic button over and over, but there was no response. This is where we started to get a little worried. We were stuck here without our cell phones, and after not getting a response for a while, we realized this was probably not a typical escape room. The monitor display suddenly changed, and instead of the remaining time, it now said, "Continue the game." We bickered for a while, but in the end, we reached a conclusion that we had no other choice but to play the game. Mostly under Daryl's proposal. Alright, there was also a key in the safe, Daryl said. He reached into the safe and then screamed. We all shot our heads towards him, and saw that his wrist was caught inside the safe. "Fuck, I'm stuck," Daryl shouted. We rushed in to help him, and it became apparent that his hand was caught in some sort of trap. Just then, the monitor display changed, and it started playing a video. It was the same video from the picture of Michelle bathing. It was clear from the video that the stalker was filming her from outside her window. The video ended abruptly, and the message that said, "Confess," appeared on the screen. With a 1-minute timer counting down, Daryl screamed again, but this time in terror, as the safe started to slowly sink into the perfectly fitted hole below it. At this rate, his hand would be crushed in less than a minute. The timer stayed on screen, but the video of Michelle bathing replayed over and over. We tried pulling Daryl's hand out, but it wouldn't budge. The message, "Confess," kept popping on and off, as we got into full-blown panic. What does confess mean? I stared at the screen. Only 20 seconds remained. "Somebody do something," Daryl shouted. 10 seconds. It was me. Everyone and everything went still and silent. The timer stopped counting, and the video paused just in time for everyone to see Michelle's breasts exposed in a zoom-in. The safe stopped sinking, too. "I filmed her, alright?" Mike repeated. We all looked at him in silence as he looked at Michelle. A loud click echoed through the room, and Daryl finally pulled his hand free. "Mike?" Veronica's voice trembled. Mike said, still looking at Michelle. "That day when I saw you jogging and you were wearing a tight shirt, I just had to get a closer look, so I followed you." "You followed me?" Michelle looked disgusted. "Hey, you were teasing me in those clothes and..." "What?" Veronica interjected. A big commotion ensued where Veronica and Mike argued intensely. It ended with Veronica calling Mike a disgusting creep, and Mike justifying his actions. Michelle simply stood shyly in the corner of the room. "Guys, we can leave this for later, but for now we really need to find a way out of here," Daryl said, as he put the key he found in one of the drawers. Everyone reluctantly agreed, and this time Daryl was careful when he pulled out a stack of papers. On it were printed screenshots of erotic text messages between two people. Some of the words were blanked out, leaving out important information like names and places. As we flipped through the pages, the text got increasingly more salacious, and the final page had sentences like, "You're so much better than blank," and "You can never tell blank." Just then, a sharp metallic sound came from above us. We looked at the ceiling and saw spikes protruding. The sound of metallic scraping ensued as the spikes started extending downwards. "What do we do?" Mike shouted. The monitor display changed again to a message that said, "Confess," and under that was a timer showing 1 minute. "Confess what?" Daryl shouted. Most of us looked at the printed messages once more, trying to figure if they looked familiar. The spikes were dangerously close to our heads now, and we crouched to buy ourselves some time. "For the love of God, whoever did this, confess!" Daryl shouted. I glanced at Veronica, who was crying by this point. Our eyes met, and Veronica hesitated for a second before shouting, "I slept with Adam." Like before, the spikes stopped moving and retracted into the ceiling. "You what?" Mike asked. Veronica kept silence, even after Mike berated her. But pretty soon, an all too familiar sound started playing from the speakers. It was Veronica's voice, moaning and saying my name. My voice was there in the background too. "Stop it," Veronica shouted, and started throwing objects at the monitor in vain. The sound stopped soon enough, and Veronica started apologizing to Mike. I, too, started to explain how we didn't mean for it to happen. Before I realized what was going on, Mike punched me in the face, and probably would have done it again if Daryl hadn't stopped him. A few minutes of heated arguing ensued between the three of us, but eventually, we knew we had to continue. We followed the next clue, and opened up another safe. It had a bag of marijuana in it. "Shit," Daryl cursed. "What is it?" I asked. The message, "Confess," appeared again. But Daryl didn't wait for another trap to activate. He said, "Adam, whenever you drive me, I'd always take money from your car." I stared at him in disbelief. He continued, "I know where you keep it, and I'd always take a little bit for weed. Just enough so that you wouldn't suspect. And then when I told you I needed money to buy meds for my mom, I lied. I'm sorry, man." He looked down in shame as we all stood silent for a while. A loud click resounded in the room, and a cabinet door opened on its own. All of us rushed to it and inspected the interior. There was a camcorder there. Daryl took it and pressed the play button. "No, don't." Mike tried to snatch it away, but Daryl was faster. The same video of Michelle taking a bath started playing, but then in the video, she noticed the camera and approached the window as Mike tried to hide. She opened the window and gasped, as Mike tried to make up an excuse. Initially, Michelle was disgusted, but soon looked like she was flattered. She invited Mike inside. The video cut off with Michelle intentionally dropping her bathrobe on the ground in front of the camera. "What the hell?" Veronica shouted. "You screwed my boyfriend?" Another argument ensued. Veronica calling Michelle a slut, and Michelle telling her she knows how to please Mike better than her. A fight broke out, and we all got involved soon to separate them. After everyone was relatively calm, Daryl pressed a button which was inside the cabinet. Another click, and the drawer at the desk opened. I rushed to it and pulled out a box. "Daryl, it's for you," I said, pointing to Daryl's name on the box. Daryl rushed to it and opened it, pulling out a revolver. "It has just one bullet," he said after inspecting it. The monitor changed to a split screen, showing Mike, Veronica, Michelle, and I on it. A message appeared on the top and it simply said, "Choose." The timer started again, and we only had 1 minute. This time, with every second that passed, a loud bang resounded, painfully reminding us we were out of time. As panic overtook us again, everyone shouted at Daryl, telling him what to do. This put a lot of pressure on him, as he looked like he was going to explode. Everyone just shut up for a moment. I need to think. He pointed the gun at us, making us recoil. There were only 10 seconds remaining. "Daryl, don't do it. It's a trap," I yelled. Daryl kept swiveling his gaze from Michelle to Veronica to Mike to me over and over. "I'm sorry, man," he shouted, crying. Before we had a chance to react, Daryl pointed the gun at me and fired. A loud bang echoed throughout the room, but nothing happened. I inspected my torso and found no wounds. It was a blank. I cried out in relief and then became angry again. "You shot me. I can't believe you shot me." "I had to make a choice," he shouted. "And you chose to shoot me?" I yelled back. Everyone looked relieved except Daryl, who was pale as a sheet of paper. Then the sound of a door unlocking echoed in the room. The monitor above said, "Congratulations," as we rushed outside the room. The front desk was empty, but our phones were still there. We called the police, and when they arrived, they asked us a bunch of questions. An hour later, we were let go. Veronica, Michelle, Mike, Daryl, and I don't talk to each other anymore. The trauma of the experience and the distrust between us put too much strain on our friendship. A week after we had gone to the detective friend's escape room, I got an email from an unknown sender. It said, "Thank you for participating in our immersive escape room experience. If you have any friends who would be interested in sharing in this experience, feel free to recommend us to them. We are sure that our service for them, like with you, will be eye-opening." Every year it would happen the same. It was a local tradition that on the final day of the St. George Township Scare Fair, a group of teens would find a way to stick around the farm, and find a way to scare me while I was doing the last closing round of the event I held at my farm. Usually, they sneak up and jump me in some generic plastic mask. I chase them off of my land, then go inside and have a good chuckle about the whole thing. I even have somewhat of a reputation as the local crazy old man when the fair isn't open. But last night, something unreal happened, and I just need to tell the world what happened. I started the old scare fair on the 1st of October, as I do every year with the same usual contents. A large and well-planned corn maze with a handful of local volunteers hanging inside to scare unsuspecting guests, and my personal pride and joy. My favorite scarecrow, Lucky. Every year, I would place him somewhere new, and wait until the first passerby got spooked by him, marking the first fright of the week. After the maze, we have a small but atmospheric haunted house, and in whatever field is cleared that year, we set up a little fair section with games and all kinds of good eats for the viewers who made it that far. The turnout was as expected, with nearly everyone who wasn't working at the fair showing up to visit. Hell, even with the low price of admission, I probably bought the whole damn town. All kinds of people flowed through the old gate to my farm, and found their places for the night, and off in the corner by the beer stands, me and a few good friends started our yearly betting on who in the town was going to try and scare me that night. I hadn't lost that bet since '02. Our session had a clear set of winners. Local troublemakers John Petrak and Jack Zerdoff. It was too damn obvious with the way he looked around the old farm, trying to find any good hiding spots for when the time comes, and their almost comedic attempts at seeming innocuous among the fairgoers. The week went without issue, and on the 5th of October, I locked the gate to the fair for the last time that year, and prepared myself for that final closing round. This time, I was prepared with the knowledge of the past 8 years of attempts, and had a plan myself to see if I could manage to get the jump on the 2 suspects. Well, about an hour into my route, I was getting a bit scared. See, usually the kids strike in the first half an hour, so that they can make a convincing explanation to their parents on why they got back late without pushing the limit too much. But an hour was unheard of. The only place left for them to be hiding was either at my house or in the cornfields, and I wasn't excited for either. They wanted to get me good this time, and you can sure as hell bet that's what they were gonna do at this rate. I made the final pass around the corn maze when I saw movement. Just a few stalks rustling at the far limit of my flashlight. "Saw you. Can't pull one over on me, boys." I called out to the darkness, hoping for a response. Nothing called back to me. I stepped a bit away from the corn stalks to make sure they couldn't jump me, and I made my way to the spot where I saw the rustling and looked into the corn. I wish I didn't. I can't explain what I saw in clear enough detail for you to know just what the hell I saw that night. In the corn, just a few stalks back, was the terrified John Petrak, and just behind him was Lucky, holding the severed head of Jack. Lucky raised a finger to his, I guess formally drawn on smile, as if he was telling me to stay quiet, before he rushed the shaking figure of John. I ran back to my house, which was across the street from the field, where I held the event. I jumped the picket fence as I heard John's screams fade away, and locked my door by the time he had gone silent. I quickly locked my room, and found myself a nice bottle of whiskey to try and comprehend what happened with. The police did a full search of the field this morning, and found no one. Not a trace that either of the two had been in the fields. It almost seemed like the town hadn't even noticed they had gone missing. But I noticed, and I notice. Every time I look across the street into the farm, I see Lucky. I see Lucky and 2 brand new scarecrows. Last year, my parents moved to a retirement home in the city. They let me keep their old countryside mansion. I work from home, so having the house was perfect for me. At first, I was excited at finally being able to move out of my apartment, but I quickly discovered the horror of my childhood home. It was a windy Sunday evening, a few weeks after I had moved in. I was sitting in front of my computer getting some work done when suddenly the power went out. Using my phone for light, I walked through the kitchen and down a flight of stairs, with the intention of checking the fuse in the basement. The smells of diesel and dust wafted up towards me as I awkwardly navigated the steep stairs. After what felt like hours, I reached the bottom. In front of me was a metal door, covered with bolts and gears. Now was probably a good time to admit that I hadn't actually checked out the basement before this. I was too busy with work and unpacking. Seeing this door, I felt a tingle of apprehension in my stomach, but also curiosity. I pushed gently and the door slid open. Inside was a long, musty hallway with damp, wooden walls and a dirty crimson carpet. In the end was another metal door with bolts and gears. The curiosity I had felt earlier immediately died. This was not normal. I turned around and hurried back up the stairs, to find that the electricity had come back. Just as I was about to relax, I looked outside the window and saw an otherworldly sight. Instead of trees, the house was surrounded by a layer of ethereal, white fog. Rain poured down from unseen clouds at a horrifying speed. As I watched, the fog dissipated, and gray puddles of water formed. Within seconds, they expanded into lakes that rapidly began to swallow up my house. Suddenly, I heard a crack from my study. I dashed into the room to find a corpse sitting in my chair. It was old, with a beard as white as the ethereal mist, and a fist-sized hole in its chest. Sitting on the desk where the computer should have been was a blood-stained note. Trying to hold back nausea, I picked it up and read the untidy writing. The oceans have risen. Soon they will engulf us all. It is only a matter of time until they find the thing that is not worthy of the deepest pits of hell. Help me. Darkness gradually fell across the room. After a few moments, it was pitch black. Turning pale, I dropped the note. The only sound was the rhythmic drone of rain falling outside. Then, all of a sudden, a deafening screech filled the air. There was the sound of glass shattering from the kitchen. I dropped to my knees, my fingers thrust deep inside my ears, screaming, begging for mercy. The noise stopped. Even the rain had stopped falling. It was silent as death. In front of me appeared a gaunt, skeletal figure. I turned and ran. I slammed open my front door to find that the woods were back. There was no sign of rain. My memory of the rest of the night is hazy. I do remember my legs aching, and an intense fear building in my guts. The next morning, my parents found me outside their front door, mumbling incoherently. Since then, I have gone for counseling, but I still have nightmares of that night. I have continued to live in the house, but I stay far away from the basement. I also have a generator for when the power goes out. This is a warning to all. Don't open doors to the unknown. You may not like where they lead. We live far out at the end of a seldom traveled road, on the edge of deep, dense woodlands. The nearest town, Owl Hollow, is about 25 miles to the east, and as a result, we rarely get trick-or-treaters on Halloween. So, when my wife and I heard an odd noise at the front door last night, we didn't quite know what to think. No candy, no treats of any sort. My first thought was, oh, no, we're not going to get egged for having no Skittles. I looked through the peephole and saw no one out in the dense, foggy night. But then, upon opening the door, I looked down and what I saw made me smile. A puzzled smile, but a smile nonetheless. 3 golden retrievers sat on the front porch in a little puddle of moonlight, as pretty as you please, with just the tips of their tails wagging as if they were valiantly trying to contain their mirth. Clutched in each mouth was the black plastic handle of a jack-o'-lantern candy bucket. Contents of said bucket, currently nothing. Well, hello there, boys. This is a first, I said, and turning into the front hall, I hollered, Midge, you gotta see this. Slippered footsteps padded into the hall, followed by a sequel of delight. Oh, Mike, they're adorable. Where did they come from? She asked, upon hearing Midge's voice. The intensity of the communal wagging increased by about 25%, but they remained perfectly and prettily poised in their puddle on the porch. No idea, hon. The Hobsons don't have any dogs that I know of, and I don't see a car or anything out there. I stepped out onto the porch and confirmed that there wasn't a car, wagon, or any sort of canine conveyance that would have deposited this odd trio at our door on this chilly Halloween. 3 pairs of brown eyes followed my every move, their eyebrows lifting and shifting in that way that attentive dogs have, their bodies otherwise staying stock still, minus the wee tail wags, that is. There's no one here but the Hobsons for miles, I said. They look like they're waiting for something, Midge said, and those buckets look dreadfully empty. I might have an old milk bone lying around from before Bongo died. I could swear at the mention of the word milk bone, I heard 3 stomachs growling. Something growled anyway. And none of the dogs looked like the kind to offer up a warning of that sort. Midge continued, Dear, why not invite them in? We can see if they have any collars on, and maybe contact their family, if they have one. I thought for a moment. They seemed friendly enough, and well-mannered to be sure. I swung the door wide and ushered them into the entryway with a deep bow and sweep of my arm. Gentlemen, welcome to our fair home. I'm very sorry we have nothing but some stale milk bones to offer you on this All Hallows Eve, but please, sit a spell. 3 fuzzy butts lifted off the porch in unison and walked happily into our home. As I closed the door behind them, I heard the growling sound again, but this time it came from somewhere out in the endless night beyond our house. Midge busied herself sitting out a large bowl of water and digging the dog treats out of the cupboard. Bongo, a mild-mannered and sweet, if not too bright, golden retriever himself, had died a few years before at the ripe old age of 15. Bongo had been like the son Midge and I could never have. We'd wanted twins, but fate had other plans, it seems. Bongo had died peacefully in his sleep, a comfort few pet owners ever get. Let's see here. Looks like we have 1 or 2 in this box for each of you, Midge said, digging around in the bottom of the box. Might be a tad stale, but I'm guessing they'll still go down pretty easily. I knelt down and let each one sniff my clenched hand. 3 black, wet noses took turns and seemed to approve. After sharing a look between themselves, the last one gave me a very polite lick as if to say, "You'll do. Now, about those milk bones." Midge handed them out, after herself getting the sniff and lick treatment. And they munched contentedly for a few minutes, licking up every stray crumb that fell. I looked at Midge, and she gave that small shrug she always gave when faced with a perplexing situation. Since we were all now fast friends, I took the opportunity to check their necks for any collars or ID. No go. They were clearly well cared for and well groomed, but where they came from, we had no idea. I also confirmed that all 3 were indeed boys. After the treats, they all took turns making a run at the water bowl, then sat back down in a line and looked up at us with expectant eyes. They then leaned down and picked up their jack-o'-lantern buckets again. I caught one of them looking out over by the hearth, where we had a large sheepskin rug set before a cozy fire. I patted the nearest one on the head and said, "Oh, alright boys. You'll have to jockey for space, but wherever you came from, you deserve a rest. It's probably been a long, cold journey." They trotted off into the living room as one, and after appropriate amounts of sniffing and circling, laid down their candy buckets and plopped onto the sheepskin. "Well, that was different," Midge said with a smile. "Been a while since we've had a dog padding around here, and I just realized how much I've missed it." "Me too, Midge, but they have to belong to somebody. Golden retrievers don't just drop out of the sky and land on our porch on Halloween. I think they were probably out trick-or-treating with their people and got lost." "Perhaps," Midge said. "But for now, they're here, and I intend to take very good care of them. I'll start looking for the owners in the morning, and maybe put up some flyers in town. But we can't just send them out into the cold night, by the looks of it." And here she glanced out the window, at the gathering clouds skittering across the full moon, like a ghost tattered sheet. "There's a storm brewing." She was right. While the dogs munched treats and got cozy by the fire, the foggy night had turned overcast, and an icy drizzle tapped against the window panes like skeletal fingers. "Okay, love. I have to get some more firewood from the pile. Be good to get it before it gets too snotty out there. I could use a cuppa if you're so inclined. Probably catch a chill out there." "Sure, I'll brew some up. Then, I think I'll sit by our newfound friends and enjoy the fire. I might even play a little music, maybe some 3 Dog Nights," Midge said with a smile. She gave me a peck on the cheek and said, "I love you, Mike. Thanks for letting them in. I know you don't believe in this stuff, but I think there's a reason they're here." "I love you too, hon. I think they're here to help us finish the milk bones," I said with a grin, getting on my coat and grabbing the wood carrier. "Splash of bourbon in my tea?" "As always," she said. The wood pile was about 25 feet from the door, at the edge of the lawn, and abutting the vast forest known as the Witch's Wood. The nights had indeed chilled and turned nasty. A driving rain stung my eyes, and had me nearly soaked on the short trip to the tarp-covered stack of cordwood. As I loaded logs into the canvas wood carrier, I again heard the growling sound coming from the depths of the trees. It was low and mean, like a chainsaw cutting through bone. I looked into the forest, but couldn't make anything out, and I'd left my torch in the house. As the old story goes, it was a dark and stormy night, and I didn't know what the hell was out there. The sound came again, nearer this time. I could almost now make out a faint smell, something musty and rank, with top notes of carrion and decay. Being this far out in the country, we have our fair share of wildlife, some of it of the large and carnivorous type, so I thought it prudent to finish up quickly and make a beeline for the front door. I wiped cold rain from my eyes and made for the house. A large shadow loomed before me, and the smell of decay suddenly intensified. I caught a glimpse of something very large and very hairy, and felt the air beside me parts with a whoosh as a gargantuan paw swiped at me. I blindly swung the heavy wood carrier at it, and felt it connect with a meaty thud. The sound of sharply exhaled air gave way to that same low and rough-edged growl, which then morphed into a keening howl. I didn't stick around to find out what made it. I grabbed the biggest log I could from the log carrier and ran for the house so quickly I felt like I was skimming over the top of the grass. I knew it was behind me, but I'd at least slowed it down a bit with the blow from the wood. I made it to the front door, swung it closed, and threw the bolt, calling out for Midge at the same time. The door was heavy and solid, with a reinforced frame, our nod to security because we lived so far out. A monstrous thud shook the door, and that same howl of rage echoed from behind it. Midge came into the foyer, the 3 dogs flanking her. All traces of good nature and mirth had been wiped from their faces, and they stared at the door with an intensity I didn't think a dog could muster. Another blow to the door. A hinge popped loose, and the pin clattered to the floor. "Mike, what is that? What's outside? Is it a bear? Are you okay?" I took a deep, shaking breath. "I'm okay." Bit shook up, but none the worse for wear. It's no bear, at least no bear I've ever seen. Big, upright, and smelly. I'd had my back to the door, but now, as I went towards the front closet for my rifle, all 3 dogs took up position in front of the door and began to raise a ruckus. The dogs went crazy, scratching and pawing at the door in a fury as more blows hammered it from the outside. Midge and I stood in the hall, rooted with terror and awe at the spectacle unfolding before us. As the dogs jumped and yelped at the door, a final booming thud sounded and the door flew into the house. The dogs narrowly missed being crushed as the door landed in the front hall in a cloud of plaster dust. Rain poured into the house, and the porch light outlined the immense furred shape standing in the doorway. I only caught a glimpse, but it was easily 7 feet tall, with massive shoulders that spanned the doorway, and teeth that shone like desert bones. It threw back its huge head and let out another deafening roar, breath steaming, and the dogs were on it. All 3 leaped and hung on by their teeth, trying to get at its great, thick neck. It swept at them with huge paws, but as soon as it had knocked one off, the other 2 dogs would set on it. I could see it was almost toppling over from the weight of 3 attacking dogs, and it took a step back to steady itself. The dogs sensed the change in posture, and must have taken it to mean they had the upper hand, and the tide was changing in their favor. They leapt with renewed energy, swerving to avoid muscular forearms and sharp claws, jaws clamping on befouled fur. Whatever capacity this beast had for rational thought, I didn't know, but it must have done some internal calculus and decided it was outgunned. With a final swipe of a hairy paw and a thunderous howl, it knocked one of the dogs halfway across the lawn and turned, loping for the trees of the witch's wood in great strides. The dog that was knocked to the lawn got up, and his mates joined him. The 3 dogs set out together into the night after the werewolf. After the howling and barking and thrashing of the door, the silence in the house was profound. My ears were still ringing, and my heart was jackhammering in my chest. I sat down on the bench in the hallway and rested the log next to me. Midge sat beside me, her face white. Did that just happen? Yeah, honey. 3 strange dogs just showed up at our door on Halloween and chased an honest-to-God werewolf away from our home, saving our lives in the process, and we had no Skittles. Okay, was all she said. There's no real protocol for what exactly to do when one is saved from near certain death at the fangs of a previously fictitious creature by mysterious strange dogs. So, we decided to have tea, a splash of bourbon in Midge's, extra double splash in mine. "Do you think they're okay, Mike?" she asked, cupping the mug in her hands. "Well, I sure hope so, Midge. The thing was so damn big. They seemed like they were giving it a heck of a run for its money, though. They are good boys. I don't suppose we should go." She trailed off. "Midge, we're lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to be alive after being blindsided by that thing out on the lawn. Much as I appreciate what they did, I can't see exposing us to more danger and going after them." "Oh, Mike, they were so brave. Who'd think those sweet faces would go along with an instinct to protect us like that, against that beastly beast? I hope they aren't hurt. Should we phone the police? I can't think of a way to tell them what happened without making us look like a couple of loonies. Can you?" No, I can't." For a while the sound was the crackling of the fire, the storm whipping around the corners of the house, and 3 dog nights singing about being out in the country. Whenever I need to leave it all behind, or feel the need to get away, I find a quiet place, far from the human race, out in the country. I can't say they were helping much. Midge and I decided to sit by the fire for a bit and nurse our drinks while we waited for, well, we didn't know what. I managed to prop the door back into place, though it was bent totally out of shape, and more or less secure it with duct tape. For some reason, I didn't think our 7-foot hairy and smelly guest would make a reappearance that night. In any case, I kept the rifle close at hand, though my supply of silver bullets was at exactly zilch. The warmth of the fire and the whiskey eventually had their way with us, and we nodded off, curled together on the sheepskin like the 3 dogs were hours before. Midge just smelled better. We were awoken by scratching and whining at what was left of the front door. A paw, thankfully a normal-sized dog paw, and not the least bit werewolfy, managed to poke between the door and the bent and twisted door frame, as if beckoning us. There was blood on it. The clock read 2:58 a.m., and the fire was down to embers. The storm still raged on outside. I threw a log on the fire and clutched the rifle as I looked out of the living room window towards the remaining of the front door. Only 2 dogs sat there, same position as before, minus the jack-o'-lantern buckets. No wagging. I tore down the front door and let them into the house. One had a good-sized gash over his haunches, with a dangling flap of skin. The other had a series of 4 shallow cuts that raked along his flank, and patches of missing fur on his forearms. Both of their muzzles were stained with blood and gore, and it's not an exaggeration to say that the spark of mirth and merriment that danced in their eyes previously had been extinguished, replaced by a look of loss and sorrow that was almost human. They were exhausted and bone-tired, as if they had just crossed 1,000 storming seas and battled Medusa herself, which maybe wasn't all that far from the truth. The 2 remaining dogs limped into the house and sat down in front of us. 2 sets of brown eyes looked up at me. "Boys, I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Thank you. I'm sorry about your friend," was all I managed to get out. I got down on my haunches and hugged them both, burying my face in their warm fur. Midge came up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Oh, Mike, that poor dog. He saved us." "They all saved us, Midge. All 3 of them." The 4 of us, me and Midge, and the 2 twin dogs curled up on the sheepskin together in front of the fire, and slept hard through the remains of the night. My name is John Ryland, and I'm a supernatural investigator. As a former private investigator, I help clients who come into my office with any inquiries related to situations with unexplainable happenings. Although the business hasn't been good recently, I believe I am fairly competent in my job, as during my 14 months of self-employment, I haven't had a single dissatisfied client. At least, that was the case until her. While I was idling at my desk on a lazy Tuesday morning, a woman walked into my office. "John Ryland's door is always open to those in need," is what the plaque nailed outside my front door reads, and it's something that I genuinely believe in, which is why I have a habit of leaving my door unlocked during regular business hours. So, a stranger letting herself in wasn't very surprising. She was an elegant woman, wearing a dark suit, a jet black hat, and a thin veil covering her face. Her outfit looked more like she was going to a funeral home rather than a detective's office, although the 2 usually don't have much difference in dress code. From what little facial features I could see, she appeared to be in distress. "Are you Monsieur Ryland?" she called out to me in a thick French accent. "I would like to believe so," I replied. "Oh, good. I need your services, Monsieur Ryland. Mind if I take a seat?" "Please, go ahead." I gestured at one of the client chairs front my desk. "Thank you," she said before settling herself down. "You see, it's my husband. He has gone missing." Crap, I thought, because this looked like another "my husband is gone" case, which I get occasionally. Some guy decides to leave his wife out of the blue without a note, and the cops can't do anything because the bloke just disappeared off the continent. Before you know it, the sobbing wife is at my office, begging for an explanation. "Well, have you contacted your local law enforcement yet? Are you sure this needs a supernatural investigator?" I emphasized. Yes, it most definitely does, Monsieur. You see, my husband never disappeared like this before. I giggled in my head, as this marked the 6th time this year I've heard this exact same line. I woke up yesterday and he was nowhere in the house. Didn't leave anything behind except for this, she continued, taking a small metallic box out of her purse and handing it to me. I found it in his study, where his cigar box used to be. The box itself looked really old, near ancient in fact. She could probably sell this as a vintage item. For a moment I thought she has mistaken this for a pawn shop. Wouldn't be the first time, but looking inside, I could tell why she was worried. The box was empty except for a red pentagram etched to the bottom, facing upside down when looked at from the side you open it. I recognized what this was immediately. Ma'am, I have some bad news, I said, now worried. I'm afraid your husband has attempted to summon a demon. A demon? Monsieur, that can't be. My husband would never do that. 8th time this year I've heard that line. Well, there is no other explanation I know of. A pentagram-infused metallic box is the first step to summoning a demon. Say, Mrs. I stumbled for a second, realizing I never asked her name. Annabelle Louise, Monsieur. She helped me out. Well, Mrs. Louise, was the box empty when you found it? I'm afraid so, Monsieur Ryland. Is that worrisome? It is worrisome indeed. You see, the rest of the steps for summoning a demon involves filling the box with necessary items. Give it some sort of bait to get it out of hell before you capture it. This box right here is essentially a hellish mouse trap. However, in some cases, the demon manages to elude the trap, or sometimes the summoner doesn't set up a trap at all. In any case, if the demon is not captured in time and achieves its freedom, it would most certainly try to acquire the contents of the box it was summoned with, just like how a mouse would eat the cheese on a mouse trap, if you don't set it up correctly. If your husband truly succeeded in his demon summoning endeavors, and the box is empty, then... I didn't know what to say. I dealt with escape demons before, both caused by experienced cult professionals and teenage kids with too much free time, but no matter who called them, the demons never saw the summoner in a good light. She didn't have to say anything to let me know she understood the situation. Still, I would very much like to come to your household and investigate the situation personally, I offered. Yeah, that could be arranged, she exclaimed before giving me her address. Well, I think I can fit you in this afternoon, I replied, looking at my completely blank schedule for the next month. Thank you, Monsieur. You can keep the box if it would help, she said before getting off her seat and heading for the exit. I heard her footsteps echo in the hallway for a few more seconds and then she was gone. I didn't spend much time preparing. I already had my brown trench coat, no proper detective can live without it, cigarettes and lighter on me, so I simply loitered around for a few hours before leaving the house. It is always a good idea to make a client think you are more busy than you actually are. I learned that from a book. I left the demon mousetrap back at the office, it might be useful later, and headed downstairs from my 3rd floor office. My piece of crap car was exactly where I parked it last night. I got behind the wheel and drove out. The address Mrs. Louise gave me was at the very edge of the city, completely isolated from the rest of the town. Once there, I managed to find a mansion sitting atop a small hill, surrounded by a thick forest on 3 sides with the remaining side facing the main road. The property consisted of a wooden 3-story building, a stone portico, and a well-tended garden, all fashioned lavishly. However, Louise Manor was showing its age. The main house looked like nobody painted it in the last decade, with the exterior showing signs of both blue and whitish colors. The pavement leading in had cracks all over, and there was the occasional moss in the gray stone wall surrounding the property. You could tell Louise Manor wasn't a stickler for appearances. As soon as I spotted the manor in my sights, I drove my car through the wide archway, which constituted as the entrance, and parked my car in front of the porch. The portico looked big enough to accommodate a dozen cars. However, there wasn't a single other vehicle here, which was surprising as the driveway was filled with fresh tire marks, most likely less than a day old. I figured that it was either the cops who came before me, or a recently stolen car collection. From my experience, you can never tell one from the other. I stepped out of my car, walked up the steps leading to the front door, and rang the doorbell. A funny little melody played for about a half-minute to no response. No footsteps, no answer, nothing. I was about to give it another go when I noticed the note beneath the door. It was addressed to me, Monsieur Ryland. I went out to buy groceries. Please let yourself in. Sincerely, Annabelle Louise III. It seems I made a good enough impression on Mrs. Louise for her to trust me with free access to her house. The door opened easily when I turned the handle. I let myself in, as per instructions. Inside the house was surprisingly dark. I have just noticed that all the blinds were down, and so the only source of light illuminating the entryway was the sun shining through the open front door. But despite the dim light, I could immediately tell something was terribly wrong. First thing I noticed was a chandelier crashed onto the ground, spreading its glass shards everywhere. The dresser right next to the door was pilfered, contents lying on the floor. Lanterns on both sides of the entry were shattered to pieces. Just to top it off, the whole room was filled with blood and scratch marks. It also didn't help that the whole room looked like somebody decorated it before the French Revolution happened. I thought the worst as I rushed inside. "Anyone here?" I shouted as I upholded my not-so-legal handgun from my belt. "Mrs. Louise?" When I didn't get a response, I took out a flashlight from my back pocket and illuminated my surroundings. The foyer led to a straight hallway, branded with bloody handprints and glass pieces, which branched off into 2 corridors left and right. Panicked, I ran straight through. Both directions led to more hallways, which led to more corridors, a few living quarters, and a stairwell. Not surprisingly, each area looked the same as before. Interior decor from the 18th century, all the light sources out of commission, blood everywhere. I'm never trusting a self-help book again, I thought to myself. Make your clients think you're busier than you actually are. What a load of bullshit. I could have just followed her back home, and none of this would have happened. I searched the whole house from the bottom to the top, but there was no one in sight, just more destroyed, archaic property, and signs of a terrible struggle. Defeated, I decided to go outside and take a breath before thinking of my next move. But as soon as I reached the foyer again, I was met with a surprise. The front door I came in through was nowhere in sight. Instead of its place was another segment of the despicable wallpapered walls that surrounded the entire house. Not again. Demons love to play tricks, especially ones that involve trapping their victims in their own house. There was no use trying to escape. I knew for a fact I wouldn't be getting out of here unless I killed the bastard with my own hands. My thoughts started racing as I dashed around the house, trying to think of clues for where this thing might be. The lanterns were all destroyed. Was it afraid of light? I inspected every lantern I could find. They all looked like they were blown up from the inside, as opposed to smashed in. Pyromancy wouldn't be out of the demon's playbook. I looked closer at the blood. There were way too many splatters around the house for it to be from a single person, or entity. Was Mrs. Louise's husband here the whole time? Then why would she come for my help? Did the demon bring more friends with it? I've never heard of a pack of demons roaming together. There were no signs of a ritual around the house, so was the demon just cannibalistic? Demons usually kill in rituals to absorb the victim's soul. This one looked like it did all this for fun. Also, why was there signs of a battle in every room? There is no way a human couple can hold against a demon long enough to thrash an entire house. More and more questions were forming in my head with every lead I found. Nothing made sense, and yet there were all these clues for me to investigate. I checked my watch, and I realized I have been gone for about 4 hours. Then, it hit me. Of course. How could I not see it before? The tire marks, her note, the unlocked door, the terrible home decor choices, and the fact that this all feels like a sub-average detective novella. I knew exactly what I was going against. Without missing a beat, I ran into the kitchen and found the cupboard with all the cleaning supplies in it. I gathered all the mops, rags, and soap I could find in the house. Thankfully, the tap was working. Before long, I was at work, cleaning the house. I began with the kitchen counter, mopping all the blood and organizing the cupboards. I swept the floor, put all the broken items and glass shards into a garbage bag. I even used a steel wool to repair some of the scratches on the hardwood floor. Once I made the kitchen as clean as possible, I moved to the living quarters, hallways, and even the bathrooms. By the end of approximately 2 hours, the entire first floor looked clean. It didn't look brand new per se, but it was definitely livable. Hell, I could probably sell it as a house flipper for a reasonable price. But more importantly, all the evidence of a demonic death fight was destroyed. I was just about to move to the second floor, with a mop and bucket at my side, when I saw Mrs. Louise herself walking down the stairs. I watched her descend as she came down the last step and faced me. She talked in a calm voice. "Monsieur Ryland, It is so good to see you here. I think I passed out sometime after coming back home. I just woke up in the attic. Oh, cut the crap. I know what you are. I interrupted her little speech. A colleague told me about you once. Never thought I'd see one of you in person. What are you talking about, Monsieur? Are you feeling alright? Would you like some tea, perhaps? I know you are a detective succubus. A what? A succubus. You know, those things that have sex with men to steal their souls. Do you think I want to have sex with you, Monsieur? What? No. I forgot your technical name. Anyway, the detective succubi are similar to regular succubi, but instead of having sexual intercourse with your victims, you suck away at their souls by making them perform long, mentally strenuous tasks. Most often by making them investigate crime scenes. You made up that whole story about a husband, the demon trap box, and that god-awful French accent to lure me here, just so I could run around, trying to figure something out of the nonsensical clues you left behind. All the while you were hidden in the shadows, feeding on my soul. But of course, you had to intervene when I began destroying all the precious bait you laid around. Am I not wrong? I have no idea what you're talking about, Monsieur Ryland. I just asked for your help. The sign outside your office said... Oh, and damsel in distress routine, of course. I should have called it back in the office when the whole thing started, feeling like a bad detective fiction. I guess you have experience, though. Judging by how ancient this place looks, and the freshness of the tire marks outside, I think you've been doing this actively for a bit over 2 centuries. Monsieur Ryland, please just lay down for a bit. Think you hurt your head, no? No thanks, I'll pass. If you really don't know what I'm talking about, and you need my help, I'll give you my help. I said, raising the mop and bucket in my hand. Don't worry, this place will be as clean as a newborn's bottom when I'm done. I brushed past her, and tried to go upstairs. But after just taking a mere 2 steps, I heard a voice boom behind me. You think you are so smart, don't you? It was her voice, alright. With the same French accent and everything. Guess I was wrong about that being fake. But it sounded as if it was coming out of a state-of-the-art amplifier system with badly configured distortion. She sounded demonic, alright. I spent all this time preparing this house for you. And you just destroy all my hard work. You don't even think about what I had to go through. She roared. Well, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I like my soul. I said before turning around and unloading the contents of my bucket in her face. Now, I am not comfortable disclosing the contents of the bucket, and I am definitely not proud of it, but let's say what rewards a regular succubus really hurts one of those detective succubi types. As soon as the liquid in the bucket hit her, she started screaming. Her voice was somehow even louder than before. It felt like she was trying to break in my skull with her shrieking. I instinctively dropped whatever was in my hand and covered my ears. Then, she started what I could best describe as boiling. I could see her previously pale skin transmorph into a fiery red color, almost instantly. Her veil wasn't doing much to hide her face at that point. Her cheeks, and then her entire face, started sagging downwards, turning her into a gooey paste that descended onto the hardwood floor. Her hat, suit jacket, and the rest of her clothes dropped one by one as her whole body gradually turned into demon paste. The whole process took less than a minute. When the screaming stopped, all that was left of Mrs. Louise was a disgusting grayish goo lying in a woman's suit. She was pretty much dead. Right after she died, the whole house changed. All the lanterns, furniture, and even the wallpaper vanished into thin air within the blink of an eye. The house that previously had a all-or-nothing death fight atmosphere now looked empty and clean. If it weren't for the demon jello, you could believe nobody lived here before. With the detective succubus defeated, I paced back to the foyer. The front door was back where it was supposed to be, but my victory was short-lived. On the right-hand side of the entry hallway, where there was supposed to be just another dreadful segment of wallpaper, there was now instead a metallic gate. Sudden appearance of doors stopped shocking me a while back, yet I was still madly curious about what could be hiding behind it. But when the rusty gate opened, I found exactly what I expected. Skeletons. Hundreds of them. Some of them more flesh than the others. It must have been a closet of sorts where she hid all of her previous victims. All presumably investigators who successfully fell into the detective succubus's trap. Young, inexperienced detectives, excited they were going on an adventure straight out of a dime novel. Forced to solve an unsolvable crime scene until they dropped dead. I couldn't do much for them other than feel sorry. Not wanting to stay there for longer, I closed the skeleton closet behind me and walked out through the way I came in. It was dark outside. I checked my watch. It was way past midnight. My car was still where I left it, which was a slight relief. I lit a cigarette and sat down on the front porch stairs, facing against the starry night. Damn, I didn't get paid again, was all I could think of. I work for one of those phone applications that allow its users to order food to be delivered to their door. My job consists entirely of just that. I accept the order on my side of the app, I pick up the food, I drop off the food. Easy, and it can be decent money if I work a lot of hours. Last night at around 9 o'clock, I was sitting in my car waiting for my next delivery. I received a request from a man named Mark to pick up an order from a Chinese place. I accepted the order and went to the pickup location. When I got to the restaurant, they told me that there was going to be a 30-minute wait for the food. While this was annoying because it affected both my tip and my time for other customers, it came with the territory. Plus, this is the only Chinese place in town, and the phone was ringing off the hook. The restaurant had a small sitting area right next to the register, so I made myself comfortable. I pulled out my phone and began to browse through some social media. About 10 minutes later, the bell on the door rang, and a man in a dark gray suit walked in. Something about him seemed off. He had no hair at all. He was completely bald up top, clean shaven, and whatever eyebrows he might have had were non-existent in the low light of the restaurant. He looked me in the eye as he walked by me to the register. No nod, no hello, nothing. There was no connection when our eyes met. Not that I wanted to go on a date with him, but I usually feel something when I lock eyes with another person. It was like looking at a painting. Once the man passed me, I looked back down to my phone, but I could hear him talking very softly to the cashier. I couldn't make out exactly what he was saying, but the cashier didn't sound happy. I heard her say, "You buy food or you leave." Based on how he was dressed, he didn't look like he was in a position to be begging for food. Even with the cashier raising her voice, the man showed no emotion. I was trying hard to not pay attention to this whole ordeal. Maybe 30 seconds later though, while the phone was ringing, the cashier said, "Whatever, take them." She handed a bunch of those Chinese takeout cartons and chopsticks to him. They were all empty. Without saying a word, he took them and walked out. The cashier picked up the phone and got on with her job. 15 minutes later, my order number was called. I closed out my phone and went up to the cashier. She handed me the bag, which was securely stapled shut. I got back in my car, punched in the address, and continued doing my job. As I got closer to the drop-off address, I entered a wealthy neighborhood. Every house on the block was far away from each other, and must have been worth over $3 million each. Every car I passed was a luxury car. My 2008 sedan must have stood out. While stopped at a streetlight just 2 streets away from the drop-off address, I saw maybe the nicest car I've ever seen. Then, when the light turned green and I was able to drive past it, I noticed the very same man I saw in the Chinese restaurant was driving the car. He didn't notice me at all. I was just 3 streets away from my drop-off location, on the complete opposite side of town too. I kept going. I got to the house, which was an enormous brick house. The driveway was long, and the lawn was manicured perfectly. The door of the 3-car garage was open, and I could see 3 of the most beautiful vehicles I've ever seen. I walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. No answer. I rang it again. Finally, the door swung open. I was met by a man in what was left of a business suit. He had rolled up his sleeves and taken his tie off. He seemed confused to see me, and was chewing something. "Mark?" I asked. "Yeah, can I help you?" He replied, seeming confused. "I'm here delivering your food." I said as I extended my arm holding the bag. As I did so, I noticed a woman come out from the kitchen into the living room to see who was at the door. She was holding a Chinese food container and chopsticks. It was clear that she had been eating from the container. "I'm sorry, someone already dropped food off. The order must have gone through twice," he replied. As he said that, the woman dropped to her knees and clutched her stomach in pain. "Elizabeth, what's wrong?" The man said as he ran over to her and grabbed her. "It hurts. It hurts," she screamed. The poor woman was in serious pain. "Did a bald man in a suit drop off the food?" I asked. "Yeah, why?" He answered,